Well, sometimes I'm not as loyal as I might seem, so sometimes I may feel the need to go back on my word, especially when in the presence of a light bulb moment. Hey coral reef enthusiasts, I'm RidersDX and welcome to my channel where today we're going to tackle a movie I thought I had very little to say about, until I started realizing how similar this was to one of my favorite episodes of the show that shed a lot of light as to what went wrong with this movie. Yes, it is the Sandy movie we're conversing about. And so, if you checked out my last video on the leaked Plankton movie, then you would have heard me say that I had absolutely nothing to say about the Sandy movie because it just seemed like it was pretty much akin to every other spin-off that's come out with SpongeBob so far, and how little value it really does give me as a viewer and as a longtime SpongeBob fan. But then I gotta say that the brain got a cooking, you know? I was in the kitchen, they were stirring the pot, they were chopping the onions, they were adding in the spices, and I thought about it and I realized after really digesting the Plankton movie in particular that there was a very strong and particular reason why I think the Sandy movie just does not work, and why it actually is one of the most frustrating pieces of media to come out of SpongeBob in a long time, and also why it essentially ruins what the franchise used to be so good at doing. And so how did I get to this point of view? Well, let's start with the beginning, because I decided to finally watch this movie when it released properly on Netflix in the past week. So when I first watched this movie, I found it to be such a difficult piece of media to actually engage in. I mean, I suppose the Voodoo Ranger I had in my hand definitely didn't help matters, but I was severely disengaged from the movie even before I took a single sip. And well, to me, there wasn't really much else to say after that initial viewing. You know, I watched it, it wasn't horrible, but it wasn't really anything special either. So it just sort of seemed like one of those movies where I had literally nothing to say. So there was really no point in making any content about it. It basically came off to me as an even worse version of Sponge on the Run, which in and of itself was a huge disappointment to me. I really want to like any SpongeBob project, but I especially want to like that one just because the animation of that movie is so gorgeous. It reminds me so much of the art style of like the Puss in Boots movie or the Spider-Verse movies. If SpongeBob could have a movie as good as those movies, both visually and script-wise, then it would have been over. It would have been over for everyone else. So it truly is unfortunate that such amazing animation was wasted on that cardboard box of a script. So that was all fine and dandy, I guess. The Sandy movie just pretty much like faded into obscurity into my brain. But as I said, I watched a leaked Plankton movie, and it was a movie I admittedly had very few expectations for, especially after watching the Sandy movie. I came to discover, however, after finishing this Plankton movie, that I actually quite enjoyed what they came up with, which while shook me to the very core with the fact that SpongeBob could still come out with something so good, it also got me thinking, what does the Plankton movie do that the Sandy movie doesn't? So I did what any sane human would do on a cold, rainy Saturday night where the only plans I had were to curl up into a ball and cry over how meaningless life is. I decided to rewatch the Sandy movie instead, and this time my eyes were on. I was taking notes like a good noodle, and nothing was going to steer me away from the furry squirrel movie on my television. While watching this movie, I found 3 overall discoveries I didn't quite capture the first time I saw this movie. So the first one is that this movie just looks weird. It looks weird. Mr. Krabs, for instance, looks far more like a plastic toy than his usual self, and Patrick has like actual hands throughout a lot of scenes in this movie, and it's just something they really shouldn't ever do again in 3D. Like, I don't know, it just looks very weird in this context. But of course, this movie takes a lot of inspiration from Sponge Out of Water in terms of incorporating the real world. For better and worse, I'm looking at you, bobble-headed child Wanda Sykes. So visually, it just came off as a little awkward to me. Like, not necessarily terrible, but not amazing either. Just kind of a little unhinged, I guess, especially with some of the Wanda Sykes stuff. But secondly, this movie isn't really all that funny. The movie certainly feels akin to modern SpongeBob in the sense that the comedy seems to mostly stem from pure nonsense animated in the wackiest of ways on screen. There's a disgusting, absolutely revolting, putrid scene in particular I refuse to acknowledge in any shape or form, but I think you all know exactly what I'm talking about. Anyway, before I really talk about how the comedy of the film actually impacts way more beyond the funny factor of this movie, I will say that there were some moments I actually did find genuinely hilarious. The funniest part of this movie is by far actually at the very start of the movie when Bikini Bottom is getting abducted by Boots. Hopefully Netflix plays nice with me as I share with you some of the tiniest clips to prove my point. I mean, come on, this is just classic funny SpongeBob humor and actually is the closest thing to classic SpongeBob in this movie. The stop sign gag, people walking off the cliff, Fred floating up the pole to the Krusty Krab sign. I mean, there's just so much fun, nonsensical stuff here that actually is funny. And love her or hate her, Wanda Sykes gave everything to this world. She obviously had a hilariously fun time playing the villain here, and her performance was super wacky, and her makeup was makeuping. Okay, so the animation is weird, the humor is kind of meh aside from a few standout scenes, but you know what this movie's biggest mistake was that also serves as an insanely good summary of what the problem with modern SpongeBob as a whole is? The way they neglected the biggest draw of Sandy Cheeks. So this thought completely arose in my head while watching this movie when I thought about one of the most iconic episodes of the series starring Sandy Cheeks. So I thought we would walk down a shiny, diamond-studded memory lane, do a quick overview of what is probably Sandy's greatest appearance, Texas. So when you all think of Texas, I'm sure the first thing you think about is this iconic scene.
Hey Patrick, what am I now?
Stupid?
No, I'm Texas.
What's the difference?
I mean, why wouldn't you think of this scene? It is by far one of the funniest moments of the entire series, especially when considering what happens immediately after this. I think even the music that plays during this part with SpongeBob and Patrick are leisurely running away from Sandy, completely oblivious to the absolute monstrosity they just unleashed, is actually a very underappreciated factor in what makes this episode just click.
We did it. We got her.
Krusty Krab, here we come!
But you know what really helped to ensure this part of the episode was as effective as it was? The emotional buildup the rest of the episode focuses on. So the concept of a land squirrel living in an underwater town is itself a pretty unique situation you don't see too often in media. And as cool and outworldly as that would seem to a kid, Texas tackles one of the major downsides to that life, and that is the feeling of being an outsider. I mean, how can Sandy not feel out of her element? She literally has to walk around in a suit that separates her at arm's length from everyone in Bikini Bottom. So most of the episode helps to slowly unveil that Sandy feels a little homesick and how isolating that can feel living in a town where everyone is at their home. Her song in particular makes that extremely clear to both adults and kids, and as goofy as the show keeps everything, you can't help but just get that Sandy is in pain here. And it really hits hard at the climax of the episode when Sandy finds the pain so unbearable that she's willing to leave all of her friends in Bikini Bottom to remedy her loneliness. But then at the end of the episode, after all that craziness with Texas is done, you have perhaps one of the sweetest moments in SpongeBob history as SpongeBob and the townsfolk try to help Sandy feel at home in their best attempts possible. I mean, 10-gallon hats. This is the funniest and cutest thing I think I've ever seen in a cartoon. And thus, at the end of this episode, Sandy realizes that home is a place where you're surrounded by people that love and care about you. And then the realization comes that she is home. She may not have been born in Bikini Bottom and she may be anatomically different from everyone else, but everyone in Bikini Bottom loves and treats her like family. And Sandy really is just this amazing representation of how family doesn't always have to be blood. You sometimes can choose your family as well. And well, I'm going to break down and cry now because that's just beautiful. Anyway, but we can't do that because now we have to go back to the main topic at hand. Why did I just take you through the emotional roller coaster that was Texas in a video about the Sandy movie? Well, truth be told, I realized on my second watch of this movie that what this movie is actually trying to do is just beat this episode. But as you can probably tell, it miserably fails. And it fails so bad at this mission that you might actually be thinking that I'm just completely off base here. But here's where the start originated from. So the movie starts off with Sandy walking to Bikini Bottom being grateful to be a resident in this town, right? And then we spend a good portion of the movie watching Sandy and SpongeBob travel to the surface and navigate through the desert to get to Boots. On their way there, they run into a little trouble and Sandy has no choice but to call in her family for help. And well, Sandy's reaction to her family coming? Not the most ecstatic reaction. Okay, we're getting into some potential character development here. Why is Sandy not super enthused to see her family come to her rescue? It turns out Sandy's entire family is a traveling circus act, which funny enough is another example of how Sandy feels like an outsider. She is the only one in her family to deviate from this predetermined path in order to pursue her passion for science. And when we get to the part where Sandy is spending time with her family in the trailer, we get a little interaction where Sandy is talking to her parents about how despite how much they wanted her to carry on the family business, her love for science was always going to overcome that. And at first, her mom seems very supportive of her desire to pursue something different, only to end it with her desire that she stays in Texas to pursue that. And you know what happens after that? Nothing. Because, and make sure you're listening to me when I say this, this is the movie's biggest problem and how it continues a horrible trend for these extended SpongeBob pieces of media. Whenever this movie gets close to actually exploring somewhat complex issues that could really add to the richness of the story, it immediately speeds past it in favor of some nonsense that modern SpongeBob is just littered with. For instance, I found the scene where Sandy and SpongeBob were flanked by a gang of snakes to be completely unnecessary. The majority of the movie is really just taken up by SpongeBob and Sandy encountering all these crazy things like these snakes, a tornado, a water park, a stupidly dedicated dog, and way more that gets in the way of the character development we could be witnessing here. And if you add in all the scenes exploring the pure ridiculousness of Wanda Sykes' intentions in the movie, then the majority of this movie is just pure fluff that's meant to glue a kid's eyes to the screen based on pure spectacle and nothing more. And hey, if that's the direction you're going to go in, you better make sure that the comedy is just out of this world then. Sponge Out of Water took this approach, and even though there is no sign of any significant character-driven stories in that movie, it makes up for it by simply being a hilarious time. What really upsets me of this movie though is that it actually tries to tie the plot back to this teeny tiny sign of a character-driven story at the end. You see, when Sandy and SpongeBob reach Boots and confront Wanda and her lackeys, Sandy has this realization that her research in Bikini Bottom is what eventually results in Wanda conducting her scheme to abduct her friends and turn them into toys to sell off to unsuspecting children. In that moment when Sandy's friends look at her in pure sadness, you can tell that Sandy feels more like an outsider than she ever has before. How can she even look at her friends in the eye knowing that her pure existence in Bikini Bottom is what's led them to their doom? I really feel for Sandy in this moment because even with her greatest of intentions, this was just a brutal punch in the gut to make her realize that she still hasn't found her place in this world. She didn't fit in with her family because she wasn't passionate about the family business, and she didn't fit in Bikini Bottom because she's a land creature and her presence there actually led to their demise. Eventually though, Sandy is reminded by SpongeBob that Bikini Bottom is her home and that she shouldn't feel anything less just because what's happening here was out of her control. And of course, they save Bikini Bottom and Sandy acknowledges that she has two families. But this truly infuriates me because think of how much more effective this climax could have been if they properly developed Sandy to lead to this breakthrough. But instead, the majority of this movie is just filled with meaningless nonsense that just serves to entertain what writers and executives probably just assumed to be a younger audience. But I really detest this mindset because we have seen time and time again that kids can appreciate a well-written story too. Toy Story, anyone? The original SpongeBob movie? It's a common Hollywood trope that animation is just for kids. That is the bane of my existence. Animation is my preferred form of media, and I want character-driven stories. And to have this realization that the Sandy movie was actually close to telling that kind of story is actually even worse than just thinking it was another mediocre piece of SpongeBob media. The potential is there. I can see it with my own eyes, but this movie just doesn't go there, and that's a damn shame. On the bright side, if you haven't seen the leaked Plankton movie yet, that's a movie that actually does go there, and it ended up being one of the best things to ever come out of SpongeBob in a long time, so take that as you will. The Plankton movie actually has situations that contribute to the overall conflict and also supports the character development that Plankton goes through. That is not present here in the Sandy movie, and again, it's just super frustrating because there was a backbone here. There was a foundation they could have used to launch off of it and create a really compelling emotional narrative. But they just decided to insert shit instead. That's exactly what they did, and you know what? I'm gonna get them. They're on my list. Whoever wrote this movie is on my list. But anyway, y'all, let me know your thoughts in the comments section. Do you agree with my analysis of the Sandy movie, or do you disagree? Let me know your thoughts, and also give me some ideas of what other SpongeBob-esque videos you would like me to make. And if there's even other like franchises you want me to make videos about, then let me know in the comment section below. This like whole analysis of like movies / TV show things I'm doing is actually quite fun. So I'd love to do more of it. So let me know in the comments and just, yeah, thank you so much. This is Riders, riding out.